everyone, and welcome back to yet another Dwarven Tavern review. This time, I'm going to be talking about Mongoose Traveler Highguard, $49.99 from Mongoose Publishing. You get it. I mean, it's Traveler. It's an essential supplement. It just goes without saying, to me anyway, that if it exists, it needs to get got. So, what is the Highguard book? The Highguard book, and again, this one was written by Andrew James, Alan Welty, and Matthew Sprang from the other two, Matthew. And again, I'm not saying it's good because this guy wrote it. I'm saying this guy writes good, and he keeps to a standard. So, this book is and I shall quote. On page 2, it says, this book is a major expansion to the Traveler role-playing game and enable you to design, build, and fly spacecraft of all types found throughout the galaxy. You will find rules to modify existing ships, design high-performance space superiority fighters, and construct the largest capital ships to travel the Traveler space lanes. To travel the space lanes. The word traveler's not in there. With more options and more powerful weapons, Highguard returns to space combat and provides rules for framework to use in epic space battles, from spiraling dogfights involving just a handful of lightweight fighters to the clash of heavily armed battleships, fully armed and operational battle stations across a front stretching throughout an entire star system. Holy crap. I can just see it, like attack ships on fire off the Belt of Orion. Sea beams glittering in the night off the Ten-Hauser Gate. So, this book is, as you might suspect, is all about the spacecraft, which is why with the Central Supply Catalog and the Vehicle Handbook, there were no real spacecraft in it, because being completely in space, not completely in space, but, you know, the star of the show is space, which is like the silence between the notes. So, therefore, you know, you've got large volumes of information about said spaceships. Now, here is, and again, the illustrations are 5-act worthy. On page 6 and 7 is a size chart, as you can see, and it has a size, everything from the very, very small troop transport to the very, very large fleet carrier. And as a background of the whole thing is the Tigris class dreadnought, which is enormous. So it gives you an idea about how big some of these ships are and the like. So one of the things that I do really appreciate, and I mentioned this in both of the last two reviews, is the intelligence and organizational skills of the authors in to present something that's clear, to present something that is clear, but also not stupefied, you know, not dumbed down. I just like that term. But they have, for example, on page 9 a design checklist. Create a hull, and then it's got a flow chart that tells you exactly what order it's going in, and just simple little touches that I really, really like, that makes it super easy to understand while still talking about really complex concepts and systems and such. For instance, the design checklist: create a hull, install maneuver and jump drives, install a power plant, because if you don't know what maneuver and jump drives you have, you don't know how big your power plant needs to be. So there is a logical order. Then you install the fuel tanks, because if you don't know how big your power plant is going to be, you don't know how big your fuel tanks are going to be, right? So then you install the bridge, install a computer and any software, sensors, install weapons if desired. Who would design it anyway? Install weapons, install optional systems. Now that's not how they made the Warthog. They installed the gun first, and then they built the plane around it. This is not that. It could be. You could do that. Install the optional systems, determine the crew, install the staterooms, because, and again, that's the order in which it flows. You don't know how many staterooms if you don't know how many crew. Allocate cargo space, and then finalize the design. Look it over and go, yes, check. And that is that in a nutshell, which is incredibly cool. So it has sections on hull design, everything from closed structure standard, dispersed structure, a space station, like perhaps the Mir or the ISS up there. Planetoids, which is a hollowed out rock that you built a ship in, which is really cool. A sphere, which is a sphere. Yeah. It's like somebody took a sphere and put a brain in it and a couple of eyes and some teeth. And then you've got the buffered planetoid, which won't upset your stomach as much as unbuffered. Then you install the hull options. Then it has an entire section on drives, how fast they go, the thrust potential, the jump potential, the power plant, what type it is, like fission, chemical, antimatter, and so forth, and the power it generates per ton of it, and how much it costs per ton of it. Then you install the fuel tanks. Not enough power, Captain. And that's the actual heading here, page 16. The life support, and it tells it gives the severity, the symptoms, the side effects of losing power, which is life support. That's all you would really need. But, they also say iris valves, cargo hatches, automatic doors will also cease to function, and so forth and so on. Even the power can be supplied to the ship's computer, individual terminals will cease to function, and so forth. So it's quite extensive on what the consequences of not having a large enough fuel tank would be. And if you do play Empyrean or Space Engineers or one of the other games, you would be familiar with that. Installing a bridge, which is important because you got to have a place to lord over your subordinates. Installing a computer, installing the sensors, and it's got the tech specs for all these things. And it's very, very well organized. It explains everything very nicely. I don't think there's anything about this that I have read that I do not understand or cannot wrap my mind around or grasp in some way, shape, or form, which is important because if you don't understand the game you're learning, you can't play it. Right? Install weapons, which it's got a whole section on weapons and stuff. Then determining the crew, and it has a list of positions like captain, pilot, astrogator. That's like the star lizard. He's an astrogator. I apologize. That was dumb. The engineer, he's the one with the big watch. The maintenance dude, the medic, the gunner, the steward, the administrator, and officer. If you want actual ranks, I recommend Googling like ranks from, actually Traveler in the core rulebook has the ranks. So the position does not denote the rank. Bear that in mind. So staterooms allocates cargo space and then finalize the design of airlocks and cargo hatches. So yeah, airlocks is pretty final. You can't really you can't really punctuate that ship without the proper airlock. No screen doors. Weapons and screens. So screens are their way of saying shields, and it has things like the turrets, like the single, double, triple, pop-up mounts, and so forth. So it's very barbettes, effectively heavy turrets. And then it has all the different types like fusion, tachyon cannons. Tachyons, they shoot you before you get there. They shoot you before they shot you. Torpedoes, particle barbettes, plasma, and so forth. Has a very extensive list, and it's very well detailed. Loving it. Every minute of it. The black globe flicker. Black globes. So you turn it on and it's just like strobe light of darkness through in space where nothing can hit you while the black globe is up. It's crazy. And then you can discharge capacitors. I've always wondered why they didn't. Because when a black globe absorbs an attack, it puts the energy from that attack into its capacitors. When the capacitors fill up, then you have to turn your black globe off or you'll explode. And I've always wondered why they don't make some kind of like instant. I guess there's only so much energy you can discharge at once, and it is true. Discharging capacitors. If a ship it says it here on there, page 34. If a ship with a black globe generator absorbs more damage its capacitors can handle, the ship automatically explodes, destroyed instantly, because it's a lot of energy. Just like every blast you've taken, it stores it up and hits you with it all at once when the capacitor explodes. So that's a lot of damage. To avoid this, the capacitors can be discharged for every combat round the black globe generator is switched off. The capacitors will discharge an amount of damage equal to 1% of the ship's total tonnage modified by 10% of the tonnage of the ship's power plant. So it can reintegrate that power slowly. Well, not necessarily slowly. 1% of the ship's total tonnage. So if you had a 100-ton ship, it would be 1% of that, the damage that you've taken. So if the capacitor holds 1,000 points of damage, 1% of that would be 10 points of damage. Then it would be 1%. I'm sorry for the math, but it would be 1% of the ship's total tonnage multiplied by 10%. So if it's 1% of a 100-ton ship, it would be 1, multiplied by 10% of the tonnage of the ship's power plant. So if the power plant is also 100, and these are just numbers that I'm pulling out of my head because it's easier to calculate that way. If 100 multiplied by 10% of the tonnage of the ship's power plant, then you have 10, which is 10% of 100, times 1, which would be 1% of 100, the ship's power, or the ship's total tonnage. Then you have 10 points of damage per combat round. So if you take 100 points and shut it off, then it would take 10 combat rounds, metric, to discharge it all. So that is how that works. And so it's not necessarily a slow thing, but and I'm sure it could save lives. Then you have spacecraft options, starting on page 35, like the structure, armored bulkheads, modular hull, the power, solar panels, like Count Dooku's ship with the solar sails, right? High burn thruster, solar sails listed, fuel, collapsible fuel tank, a demountable tank. So that's what's used in modern cargo or modern rockets. You just jettison the fuel tank, and this says that you can convert cargo space into working fuel tanks with all the pumps and feed lines required. So you can, if you've got a long way to go, you put on extra fuel tanks, you get there, and then do whatever, because you're jettisoning your fuel and making room for cargo. Drop tanks, so forth and so on. Fuel processors, fuel scoops, very important. If you play Elite Dangerous, you know how important fuel scoops are. High efficiency batteries and so forth. Then it has accommodations like cabin space and high staterooms. The bridge, detachable bridge. Is this a mutiny? Yes. Holographic controls, sensor stations, and then you got cargoes like cargo cranes, nets, scoops, cargo mounts, external, so forth. Very extensive. I love it. It goes throughout, and then it has primitive and advanced spacecraft. If you're playing a Flintstone campaign, early prototype budget, these are prototypes and advanced jump drive advantages, maneuver drive advantages, and so forth. And you can alter the tech level and apply those improvements. So if you've got like something that high tech gives you +3 on the tech level. So if you've got a tech level 14 thing and you want to make it high tech, it becomes a tech level 17. It adds 50% to the price of it, and it gives you 3 possible advantages. Then you go through the list of advantages and apply them, because it's higher tech, which makes it incredibly flexible. And then it goes to a section of designing space stations, which is also very cool. It has a very similar design checklist: create a hull, optionally install a maneuver drive, power plant, fuel tanks and bridge, computer and software, install sensors, weapons, optional systems, determine crew, staterooms, allocate cargo space, and finalize design, which is very similar to the actual spaceship, but it's different. And I'm glad they made that distinction. So the other thing is space stations can also be put on world. They're called buildings. And if you remember, Star Wars, Mos Eisley is a space station, and it is a wretched hive of villainy and pizzas with pineapples. This is not the delivery. Anyway, and it has all the additional, it's a complete section on designing it with the staterooms, finalize the design, sensors, weapons, optional systems, determine the crew, and so forth, same as it was with the ships, only it's 4 stations. And then it has, of course, the extra section on things like the fuel refinery, commercial zone, deep space communications relays, and so forth. So it's very detailed. One of the things that I like so much about this Traveler series is that it's very detailed, very easy to understand. Then it has a section, Chapter 6, Ship's Computer, which is very important. Now, the early days of Traveler, just as a brief aside, computers were not like this. It's not like we have now. Computers were very inchoate or burgeoning technology, if you will. So they didn't know they didn't have much information to go on about what computers could possibly do, like the 1,000 T-Rexes versus 100,000 chickens, full physics-based simulation, which, believe it or not, that would be very taxing on your processor. So the section on computers is a lot more detailed than it ever was, because we know a lot more about them. Then it has high-tech like hyperdrives, space folding, and time drives, which are different. The hyperdrive takes you into hyperspace. The folding space gets you there from X. And of course, the time drive manipulates the fabric of space-time around the ship, allowing it to actually travel through time rather than space. Capable of moving the ship forward or backward in time, allowing the travelers inside to create all kinds of paradoxes. That would be awful. If, in fact, time paradoxes exist, which we don't know. We can theory. Then you have new weapons like quad turrets, medium bay weapons, large bay weapons, spinal mounts. Oh, yep. It has a small section on psionic technology and the like, which, as you may or may not know about me, I love psionics. It's got a section on belt mining and the commerce potential thereof, which is incredibly useful. It's incredibly useful. I want to go mine, I don't know, a C-class material with high concentration of organic compounds. Okay, was that asteroid alive? I don't know. I couldn't hear because it was screaming when we drilled into it. Yeah, and then it's got all about mining and staking a claim, and of course that leads to all kind of defending off claim jumpers or claim pirates, like that short story in the Ballad of I can't remember the name of the movie, but it was about the prospector and the measly skunk. It was great. It was one of the best Western movies I've ever watched. Anyway, and then it's got it goes through a section of how to create a deck plan and all that stuff. Now, the whatever program they use to design these starship decks they're lovely. I mean, I love the artwork, and it's obviously one of these campaign cartographer-esque programs. And I don't know if I ever did find out which one they use, because I would like to use it as well. But this is primarily for getting out the old-fashioned sheet of quadrille graph paper and a protractor and a ruler and a pencil and doodling it yourself, which you go blind, so be careful. Don't overdoodle it. It's got a section about fighters, the rules for dogfighting, capital ship battles, fleet traits, the fleet maneuver chart here on page 91. It's glary. One minor detractor is the high gloss paper. That's not horrible, but I prefer that it would be a little less glossy just for the glare. Then, beginning on page 93, it has the ever wonderful catalog of spacecraft, just like in the same format as the vehicle book that I did earlier. And it goes for the gig, the pebble, the launch, the smaller ships, the ship's boat, the pinnacle, the modular cutter, heavy fighter, troop transports, shuttles, so forth, and just page upon page upon page, the patrol corvette, the express boat tender, the merchant cruiser, which it has all the decks laid out. This is the merchant cruiser, and as you can see, it has 4 decks right here on the glary page. Okay, it has four decks there on page 163. And it has all of the, I mean, you could scan this in and print it out or whatever. Very, very detailed. Deck 7 for a destroyer. Nope, I'm wrong. It's got 11 decks. I'm sorry. I apologize. It has 11 decks, and it's just a Leviathan class merchant cruiser that you can sell to your heart's delight if you can get there alive, and so forth. And it goes all the way up to the incredibly large ships, as I pointed out in that first illustration about the size comparison chart, the various ships. And of course the Dreadnought, 13 decks, amazingly beautiful, hysterically wonderful. And it's 224 pages of Starship Heaven, which, there are other supplements as well, but as far as the High Guard goes, this is a freaking fantastic book. And of course it gets 5 axes, because I am a huge fan of the game, And you know, if you're a fan of something and they don't do it right, then it's even worse than if they'd gotten something, if they'd made something that was not what you really liked, slightly wrong. So it's even more important to do it right because I am such a fan of it, of the game. And this took the early small books about like that and just made them fantastic. They really did it right, and I believe that it's a necessary addition to any Traveler fan. It's another $50, but you know, what else are you going to spend it on? A ship share? I don't think so. So again, Mongoose Publishing, Traveler, Highguard, second edition. I think that's the second edition book. Yeah, very, very cool. 5 official axes. And on that happy note, on behalf of the entire cast and crew of the Dwarven Tavern, I am Dr. Jeff Goins, wishing you to want for nothing but adventure. And at first I feared it, then I charged from hyperspace. And so thank you for watching, and we will see you next time.
Let the games